Well, hey there, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it happens to be that you're tuning in here at Calvary Evangelical Congregational Church Online. Thank you so much for joining us. Really thrilled to have you with us this morning. We are not really in a series right now, just kind of doing a standalone thing. But before we get into any kind of teaching part of our worship, we're going to sing and worship through song. So as the songs play, if you know them, sing along. Enjoy that time of worship through song. And then after the music's done, we'll meet right back here to continue with our teaching. So we'll see you back here in just a moment. All right. So a couple months ago, I had a conversation with one of my mentors about morality and justice and really just kind of ethics in general. And it was a really interesting conversation that I kind of want to use as a starting point for our lesson today. I'm still not settled as of this recording on the name of this lesson, so I'll have the name for it by the time this is posted and everything, but I don't just yet. Anyway, so we're gonna use this conversation I had with my mentor as a framework for what we're gonna kind of be talking about today. But during that conversation, we got into the waters of, I think it was the Uvalde school shooting. We talked a lot about it and what the appropriate response should be from like a Christian perspective, and talk about a different kind of conversation. But in that, we just kind of generalizing those tragedies together. I mentioned how I could imagine the families feeling that justice hadn't been served if something wasn't done to the assailant punitively. And my reasoning for that was simple. They had been wronged in one of the most volatile ways, and justice, at least in our terms, it demands some kind of retribution, and the assailant should have to pay for what he did, even if that payment is his own life through the death penalty. And I know a lot of people personally who would agree with that position. And my mentor, he challenged me on this by asking me to make it more personal. He said, suppose someone were to do the unthinkable and they were to kill Kelsey and my kids. They got caught and they were arrested. And they went through the trials and everything and were put on a fast track through death row and were given the death penalty, were killed as a punishment for their crime. All the proceedings were legal, and his death was a legal killing. Would I feel that justice had been done? You talk about a deep-end kind of question. My answer, it surprised me. Initially, I had said yes, I think so. But when I took the time to think through it honestly, I ended up at a different conclusion. It's my belief that as a man, as a husband and father, it's one of my duties to my family to lead and protect them, keep them from abuse and harm. And this means that should someone come after my family, I don't, in the name of love or any other virtue, allow that person to do what they're setting out to do. And if that means I physically stop them in some means, then that's my role. That's what I've believed, right? And I've had to do quite a bit of thinking on this since my conversation with my mentor. Supposing I had failed in my self-defined role and they were killed, would I feel like justice had been done if the killer wasn't then killed in turn? Honestly, and I can say this with honesty, and it still surprises me that I can, but honestly, I don't think I would feel that justice had been done if their killer was then killed. And I base that off of my experience in the aftermath of what happened with my little sister, which we talked about just a short while ago. I wanted that guy to pay. I wanted to hurt him, but I know that it wouldn't have helped my sister. And I know that because her and I have talked about it. It wouldn't have done anything to help her for me to go and cause more harm. As I've mentioned before, I initially prayed that God would let him die, but eventually my prayers shifted towards God and towards God breaking him for his sin and bringing him to a true knowledge of who God really is. And ultimately, I think that is what justice would actually be. That God would save him. That God would reach this guy and that he would be broken by his sin. That, to me, would be more just than him dying. Based on that experience I had with my sister's situation, I feel like in this really high hypothetical slaying of my family, no, I don't think I would feel that justice had been served if the killer was killed. And that's an easy thing for me to say that I hold to. Who knows, though, without actually facing that reality, who knows what my actual response would be. But I would like to think that, given experiences I have, that I would not feel that justice had been done. But let's make this less dramatic than a family slaying. How should Christians handle in response to violence? What should we do in response to violence? Ought we to be pacifists who just take it? Should we retaliate? Is there a limit to how we can retaliate? And when it comes to defending ourselves, what kind of leeway are we given? Where do our rights for ourselves end and the love of Jesus that we're supposed to display begin? There's these kind of questions that I really want to explore. They've been asked for a long time, and there are a lot of different perspectives that make some compelling cases. The position that I've been taking lately, one that I've been trying to learn and lean into, is one that tries to put aside my Western culture, a frame of reference, and tries to get back to what Jesus had to say on these questions. And we'll be getting into parts of the Sermon on the Mount to explore them. So if you have a Bible, open up to the book of Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. That's really where we're going to hang out. Ultimately, what I'm seeking to determine is, should we resist those who would seek to abuse, wrong, oppress us, or should we aim for a more pacifistic approach? I want to start with just one first question, and that first question is pacifism or resistance? Pacifism or resistance? That's really what I want to know. Should I respond as a pacifist and just allow things to happen, or am I allowed some measure of resistance? Now let's define pacifism just so we're all on the same page as to what that actually is. Merriam-Webster defines pacifism as opposition to war or violence as a means of settling disputes, a refusal to bear arms on moral or religious grounds, an attitude or policy of non-resistance. So there you have it. In the simplest of terms, pacifism is a refusal to meet violence with resistance, particularly violent resistance. Now, resistance, on the other hand, is defined as the power or capacity to resist. So why would these two beliefs be interpreted in the same teaching? Let's look at what Jesus actually had to say in Matthew 5:38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. I'm going to try to stay somewhat objective on my own position about this. I'm probably not going to do a great job of that, but I will try. But I will be honest, and I will say that I don't think that this is teaching pacifism. I don't think that this is teaching non-resistance. That's not my... From what I've seen, it's easy to see how that interpretation has come to dominate common teaching about this particular passage, but a quick study of the language and culture of the time, I think, really shows that what Jesus is teaching here is not pacifism as we have defined it. When we read this passage and we see the phrase, do not resist an evil one, it almost misses the weight of what the word could have meant in the original language. Depending on which translation you use, it might say don't resist evil, which is weird to see because Jesus resisted evil at seemingly every turn of his life. Even the phrasing of resisting an evil one doesn't make sense with what Jesus did and how he lived. Authors David Gushee and Glenn Stassen, they do a really great job of explaining what's going on here in their book Kingdom Ethics. They say the Greek for evil can mean either by evil means or the evil person. Both translations are equally good according to Greek grammar. The decision must come from the context, and the context is that Jesus repeatedly confronts evil, but never by evil means, and never by means of revengeful violence. Therefore, the context favors the instrumental, do not resist by evil means. Therefore, we think the verse should be translated, do not retaliate or resist violently or revengefully by evil means. If their translation is correct, and I believe that it is, because it makes the most sense of the context, then this passage can't be Jesus teaching his people to pacifistically allow violence to be done. And so then, how should we understand what's being said here? Well, that's where an understanding of the cultural background really plays a major role. So let's take this just a little bit at a time. Let's start with the first of these instances, Matthew 5:39. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So often this verse has been pointed to as like a de facto proof that we're supposed to refuse retaliation of any kind. If they hit you, take it. Turn to them the other cheek. Allow them to do that one too. As followers of Jesus, we would rather receive wrong than do wrong. But is that what's really happening here? After all, Jesus did teach that if we're persecuted, we should expect it because he was first persecuted, right? But does this mean that we ought to just accept it? Should we accept abuse? The Tyndale New Testament commentaries would argue that yes, we should just accept it. They say the words of this verse recall Isaiah 50 verse 6, the servant's acceptance of insult and ill treatment. Such acceptance Jesus requires of his disciples rather than recourse to either retaliation or the law. Now there's a lot of merit to what they argue, and I wouldn't even say that they're wrong necessarily. I just don't think that that's the extreme that Jesus was taking this to. I think it's appropriate to determine, hey, is there a point where I need to resist here, or can I just take the insult? They accurately describe in the Tyndale New Testament commentary that culturally, to be struck on the right cheek, it's to be backhanded. Let's think about this. Why would Jesus specify if they're going to strike you on the right cheek? It's because in that culture, that type of place, they wouldn't use the left hand for a lot of things because the left hand was used for dirty things, right? And so the left hand was dirty. So they would primarily use their right hand. And so to slap somebody on their right cheek, you're using your right hand to do that. It's a backhand, which even in a lot of Eastern cultures today is extremely insulting. And so they would do that. And this isn't just like an insult, or even, it's definitely not the gentlemanly challenge to like a duel. This was a way of saying, you are inferior to me, and you're not even worthy of being given the dignity of personhood. You are not worthy of me insulting you properly. Walter Wink, in his book Beyond Just War and Pacifism, he really kind of helps push thinking in this arena, because historically I would have even subscribed to this idea of just taking the insult. I've even taught that as Christians we should rather suffer wrong than do wrong, which I think is still true and fits even with what Jesus is teaching here. But I think that Jesus is teaching us another way of doing that. He's not teaching us to just accept abuse. He's instructing his followers in his instructing his followers to turn the other cheek is not telling them that they should just take the hit or the insult, but it's also not telling his followers to return the insult or retaliate. It's to do something else entirely. If I'm turning my other cheek, if somebody backhands me and I turn my other cheek, what I'm really saying is I need you to treat me like a human. Right? If you're going to insult me, that's fine, but at least do it properly and acknowledge that I am a human, because I am not beneath you and I do not accept being treated as anything less than your equal. I'll accept the insult, but I'm not your inferior. This is so much more than pacifism, but it's not outright retaliation. What it is an active, non-violent resistance. It challenges the insulter without attacking the insulter. It challenges the insulter without stooping to the insulter's level. This is another level to what Jesus is teaching here. It's fascinating. Now, the next question I want to ask is niceness and generosity or confronting oppression? Matthew 5:40. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. I want to know, is Jesus teaching us to be nice and generous here, or is he teaching us how to confront oppression? I've heard it said that the principle behind this particular teaching is that we ought to be generous, we ought to be kind, not holding on to our stuff, but to have an open hand when it comes to how we value our own possessions, which I think is a good teaching. I think that is wise. But I don't know if that's what's being taught here. And there are still others who will argue that this means we ought to avoid going to court for any reason at all. But to assert that this is only to be nice and generous is to miss some cultural elements. This kind of lawsuit, it's actually really abusive. It's an abuse of power and privilege, as well as an abuse of what was socially acceptable. In the time of Jesus saying this, the people most likely to take someone to court were those who had some type of status. And the courts would be held in a very public setting where there were lots of people around. And to sue somebody for their tunic implied that the person being sued had virtually nothing left to their name. And so it was abusive because it robbed the sued of any form of protection from the elements, because the garb of the day really was two pieces. You had the outer coat, the tunic that kept you protected from the elements, and you had an inner garment, the cloak, that kept you covered, right? And so people would sue people for, or Jesus said, if people are going to go to that extreme to sue you for your coat that protects you from the elements, give them all your clothes. Give them the inner one too. This is so far away from just niceness and generosity. Much like turning the other cheek, this is standing against oppression in an active, non-violent manner. Jesus effectively taught his people, hey, get naked, which is wild. Think about it. If you only have two pieces of clothing, an outer tunic and an inner cloak, and you're sued for the outer, and Jesus says, hey, give them the inner one too, well, then you're naked. And the problem then is that the people who are around watching this unjust court proceeding are now all unclean. Now, this is significant because all those people who were around, they now cannot go about their daily lives, not until they've gone through a purification ritual, because they're unclean. And would have had them all incensed, not with the one who got naked, but with the one who tried to sue them unjustly. Again, this is a non-violent, pretty active, and let's be honest, bold way of standing up for yourself and saying what you're doing is wrong. I'm not going to fight you, but I'm also not going to make this easy for anyone involved. I'm not just going to sit back idly and just say, oh no, this is fine. I'm going to make it difficult for everybody. Now, the third question that I want to ask: love of Jesus or personal freedom? Matthew 5:41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Is this where we're supposed to show the love of Jesus instead of holding to our personal freedoms? What exactly is going on here? Now, there was a practice that dates all the way back to the Persian Empire called impression. And effectively, what happened is a militant force would compel, usually without an option for denial, a person or a person's animal to carry their items for them. And often this was abused, right? It was done unjustly. Now, in Rome, who was the occupying force of Jerusalem at this time, they were an effective authoritarian state that had rules for just about everything. And then they had rules for their soldiers that, should they overstep the rule, could result in their punishment. And the rule for Rome was that they could ask anyone to carry their things for 1 mile, but no more than that. To go more than that mile put the soldier at risk for punishment. And so often, this passage, it's been used to say that our love for Jesus should push our personal freedom to the side. If it comes to choosing between our right to be treated well or an opportunity to show the love of Jesus to someone, then we ought to take that opportunity to serve. Now again, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think we're too rights conscious sometimes, and we forget that when we surrender ourselves to Jesus, we surrender everything, including our rights. But I don't think that means that we have to accept oppressive and unjust behavior. The New International Greek Testament Commentary, it interprets this passage as the following. This is not necessarily an endorsement of the practice of impressment as such, but in a situation in which changing the rules was not a possibility, the proposed response would have the capacity of turning the nature of the transaction from one in which both parties felt worse about each other after the encounter to one in which positive human interaction might become possible. Look, I like what they say. I agree with that, but I think we could take this still a little bit further. Following the trend of what Jesus was teaching, I think there's more going on. Now, to be sure, look for opportunities to serve, and I don't even think it's wrong to say that this teaches looking for ways to change something that is unfavorable to something where both parties, all parties involved, can come away feeling better about each other. I think that's really wise and something we should be looking to do, but I don't think this is ultimately what is being taught. Follow the trend of what else has been taught by Jesus here. If Rome could only compel someone to carry their items for a few miles, and if they were very militant about following their own rules, then to go a second mile put the soldier at risk of punishment for breaking their own rules. But isn't that a problem? Isn't that potentially problematic? Because how is that not violent? Well, again, this wouldn't have been a very nice thing to do. It's a much more subtle act. Simply by using the system's own structure against itself, effectively what they would be doing would be using the system to destroy itself. One of my professors, he said it like this: allowing Rome to destroy Rome is not a concern. Yes, look for opportunities to serve, look for opportunities to have reconciling interactions with other people, but also be creative in how we respond to oppression and abuse of power. When we're seeing an abuse of power, be creative. Look at how the system is structured, and is there a way we can use the system non-violently to destroy the system? Because allowing the system to tear itself apart is really a non-issue. Now, one last question for us to look at is attachment to our possessions or system rigging. Attachment to our possessions or system rigging. Matthew 5:42, give to the one who begs from you and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Now, is this Jesus teaching us to not hold too tightly to our possessions, or is he teaching us ways to rig the system? I think it could be both. This teaching often is used to teach people not to live so tightly over their possessions. If I have something that could meet the needs of someone less well off than me, then I should do whatever I can to meet that need, be generous, give what I have, and don't refuse. Again, that's really solid teaching, and something I would encourage people to do is to live with open hands, not closed hands, because if you live with closed hands, stuff can't come into your hands, right? If you're holding on tightly, stuff can't also come into your hands. But if you hold on to things with an open hand, you hold on to your possessions loosely, well, then more can come in. Now, that's good teaching. But again, let's follow what Jesus has been doing here. Doing what he said, and this time, it would have shaken the economic structure of their day. Theirs was oppressive. It was designed to keep people down. And so to be openly generous, giving to those who are only begging because the economic system did nothing to help them, but in fact keeps them in their loneliness, that kind of behavior would actually shock the system. It would throw it off entirely, because now people aren't dependent on the oppressive structures, and they're able to find ways, creative ways, to use that system to see its weakness, really, and use it against itself. And think about the way the early church was structured in Acts 2:42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, and to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with gladness and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. This is fascinating, right? It's so creative to look at the way things are structured and say, how can I use this to dismantle itself? How can I use this non-violently, actively, to benefit people? How can I stand against oppressive things that I see, abusive powers that I see, without getting violent towards them? Now, the kingdom of Jesus, it's an upside-down kingdom. The way the systems of that kingdom work are far different than our systems today. And these teachings of Jesus, far from teaching pacifism, teach us to use these economic, violent, social, and private systems that are designed to oppress and abuse, to find ways to use them against themselves, to use the systems to destroy themselves. Now, I'm not going to say that people who hold that these teachings are telling everybody to behave passively or to behave pacifistically. I'm not going to say they're wrong. Because there's a lot of ground for what they say, and I agree with a lot of what their teaching is about, being kind, being generous, living openly. I like that. I think that's good, but I think there's more than what's going on here. This is us taking an active stand against things that are wrong, things that are abusive and violent to others. It's taking a stand without using violence, without using oppression, without going to their level, but allowing Rome to destroy Rome, right? This teaching is more than just a few different ways of telling us to just be nicer people. This is teaching us how to actually stand against violence without resorting to violence. So I want to close with this thought. The teachings of Jesus here, as I understand them, are not passive, they are not pacifistic, but are active, non-violent resistance. This set of teaching, it shows us really to think creatively about how do we confront violence, how do we confront oppression. And rather than passively allowing it to continue or pacifistically refusing to respond with anything but love, Jesus teaches an active and non-violent resistance. And it's well in line with his teaching when he warned them about the coming persecution that they would face in Matthew 10:16. He warned them, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We should be actively working in our world, helping the oppressive and violent systems within it to self-destruct through non-violent, creative means. We cannot remain silent in the face of violence and oppression, but we don't and can't respond in similar manner. Instead, we ought to follow Jesus' teaching and actively, non-violently stand against these kinds of systems. When we see violence coming on people we care about, on ourselves, it's not ours to return and meet violence with violence, but to creatively find ways to stand against it. This requires some deeper thinking and some greater trust on our part with the Holy Spirit. And I think with practice, we can learn how to do this. And it starts by looking at the examples that Jesus gave us and figuring out what are some ways we can apply those to our lives. All right, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this time together and for this teaching from Jesus. Lord, I pray that we would take this and really wrestle with it, because I feel, even within myself, I still wrestle with the appropriate way to respond to things. I'm still working out what it means for me to be a protector of my family without resorting to physical violence. And so, Lord, I just ask that you would give us the courage to lean into this teaching, to study these words for ourselves, to get into them. And then as we're engaging with our world, Lord, that we would look for ways that we could creatively and actively resist oppression that we see through nonviolent means. To see, when we see violence, to find ways to stand against it in a way that is honoring to you and consistent with the teachings of Jesus here. Lord, give us opportunities to serve. Give us opportunities to show your love. Help us to be reflective of you in your way. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, it's been good to be here with you. I'm really glad you were able to be here for this. This is an interesting teaching, and I would encourage you to just take the time and chew on this for a bit. Let it marinate and sink in. Study these words for yourselves. They're fascinating, and I think they're teaching deeper than what we're accustomed to hearing. So anyway, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. We will look forward to seeing you guys next week, whether here online or in person with us in Hoople at 10:30 every Sunday. Either way, we will see you guys next week. And until then, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his face continue to shine upon you. See you soon.